So in these problems, we're going to continue to look at the formula S of n is equal to a1 times 1 minus r to the n over 1 minus r. And difference is, instead of being given the information in a sigma notation, we have to get the information from reading the question carefully as the directions say. So the first thing I notice when I look at this is they gave us how many terms we're looking for right there in that subscript. They also, of course, gave us a1, and we're going to find r by determining what is being multiplied between these terms. And you can tell that we're multiplying by 4 pretty easily. Or if you need to, you can always do a2 divided by a1. Okay, and so in this case, that would be 12 divided by 3. Or any adjacent term that you have, you could have done 48 divided by 12. Just make sure that you do the second one divided by the first one. If you do it the wrong way, it will be upside down. So now we just have to fill in the information into this formula. S of 15 is equal to 3 times 1 minus 4 raised to the 15th. That's going to be big. Divided by 1 minus 4 in parentheses. Make sure your r's are in parentheses. And then if you want to, if you're using a calculator, a handheld calculator, like a TI or a Casio, it might be a good idea on the bottom to reduce that, because remember the top and the bottom are actually, they're separated by a parentheses. There's actually a parentheses on the top here and one on the bottom. So if you want to evaluate the bottom separately, you can. And I would only say that if you're doing something handheld on a calculator. So if you have Desmos, right, what you're going to do is you're just going to type the whole thing in. Do not try to reduce this at all. You will cause yourself to make a mistake. And you won't even know it because the calculator's doing it, right? So just type it in. And when you type it in, make sure you highlight the whole thing before you hit the division button. Okay, and then you type in 1 minus 4, and we get an answer that is in scientific notation. Now that answer in scientific notation is perfectly fine, right? So S of 15 is equal to 1.074 times 10 to the 9th power. And, you know, just keep in mind to round to the third decimal place. Keep in mind if you needed to use this to actually calculate additional things, then you would have to use more than 3 decimal places because the AP and the SAT need you to have 3 correct decimal places in your answer. So if you lop that off in the calculation beforehand, you're not going to have that decimal place correct at the end of the problem. All right, so let's take a look at the next one. Same idea, we're just going to, looks very similar actually. Let's see what we have. So we're going to use the same formula. And it's just a good idea to write that formula down for each problem to help organize your information, but also help you remember it. And then once you have that, we're going to take a look at what we have. Well, we have this. We can find r pretty easily, right? So r is these ones. Now, probably need to break out a calculator for that because r would be a2 over a1. And in that case, we have some pretty large numbers. So let's take a look at what that reduces to. Don't be afraid of those numbers because, you know, calculators can reduce them. And sometimes when you reduce it, it reduces it to a very nice number. So let's see what we get here. So 384 divided by 768. Oh, that's just a half, which is very convenient, right? It just comes out to a half. So I know a1, I know a half, but I don't know how many terms there are, right? So sometimes you figure that out after you start to plug things in. Sometimes the formula, this is why I say to always write it down, will sort of help you figure this out. So if I were doing this, I would get to right here and I would say, oh man, that's the problem, right? The problem is I don't know what this is right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take another little, kind of like I did with R, I'm going to take another little algebra break over here. And since I'm trying to determine the number of terms, when I say the word terms, I need to think about the sequence equation. And you can never really get away from your sequence equations because sequences are what make up the series, right? So this equation for sequence, the geometric sequence, is the formula that produced the numbers that we're adding. So it makes sense that you would always be needing this if something's missing. So AN means formula or any term, but in this case specifically it means last term, which is the other meaning of AN. So I'm going to put that right here. A1 is 768, and then R is a half, found that a couple minutes ago, and then we're going to do N minus 1. So now we're solving this as if this n were an x. And so when we say solving, you should always write this down if you're lost or you just don't know what your next step is. Always write the order of operations down. And when you solve, start at the bottom. This does not have an addition or subtraction because of the fact that, yeah, there's one up here, but there's actually a parentheses around that. So there's nothing below the exponent that has addition or subtraction, so that's don't have to do it. So I move to the multiplication division step, and I'm going to divide this. This is exactly like solving an exponential problem from the earlier chapter. All right, that's another complicated looking fraction, so let's take a look at what that is. 3 divided by 768 is something nutty. Let's see what it is. Oh, it's 1 over 256. Now, you may say that's not very nice, but number one, you don't want to write that decimal down, right? You don't want to be doing these problems and writing down that number. You want to write down this, and the reason is there's actually a relationship between 1/2 and n minus 1, and that relationship is the next step, right? So we did this step, and now we need to get rid of the exponential base by using a logarithm. And so to do that, we would log base 1/2, which would cancel this base. And if I log base 1/2 over here, I'm actually going to just do what we did previously, which is say, what do I raise 1/2 to get 1 over 256? Now you can ignore those numerators because they're the same. So the problem really boils down to, what do I raise 2 to get 256, which is actually 8. So this thing doesn't cancel, it evaluates to 8. Now, if you need to use a calculator for that, you could, is it 2 to the 7th? No. Is it 2 to the 6th? No. Right, so let me type that in correctly. 2 to the 6th, no. Is it 2 to the 8th? So you can get it that way. But there's also this other aspect of logarithms that is important. Now, some people, like if you have a TI, there's actually a log base button found under math. Some of the newer Casios have a log base button, but you don't actually need it. Eventually, there probably will be a log base button in Desmos found under function. Currently, there's just log and ln. But you actually don't need a change of base. I mean, you don't need a base button because you have the change of base theorem. And the way that works is you would just type in log or use your log button, and you would type in what you're evaluating. So log of 1 over 256. Now keep in mind, that's log base 10 of that, so it's a decimal. But if you divide this by log of the base you need, you're using, which is 1/2, it'll give you the value. Look, 8. Just keep that in mind if you're ever having trouble with it. So then to finish it up, we're at the grouping symbol. So we need to add 1 to both sides, and we get that n is 9. Now remember, in the world of series, this number has to be a positive integer value. Has to. Just let you know, because n is a number of terms, so it has to be a nice integer positive value. All right, so now I can type that into the calculator. Now that I know what it is, I just take that and put that back in there. And now I can finally come into the calculator and type the whole thing in. So let's see, 768 times 1 minus, this is where that parentheses on that fraction is so important, and you must make sure you click in between those to get this to the right exponent. Highlight the whole thing, then hit divide, which, remember I was on functions, so I have to go back to main. And then I type in 1 minus 1/2. And the beautiful thing about Desmos is I can actually see, did I type in what I have on my paper? And that comes out to 1,533. And it's always good to just, once you have the answer, to go back and make sure you say, oh, that's S of 9. And of course, that 9 was found over here. So again, using a calculator like Desmos, it sure does make your life easier when trying to type in complicated things like this. All right, let's take a look at one more and see what it's asking us to do. Okay, so this problem says we want to find A1. Oh, wow, so we want to find A1, but notice it says S. So we're going to start by just writing that S formula down. S of n is equal to A1 times 1 minus r to the n over 1 minus r. And let's just start plugging in what we know. It tells us that we have S of 8. Right, so it says, hey, use S of 8 to find A1. They even told us R, right? So we know what R is, 1 minus 3. We know this n as well, right? Because the n is the same n as here. So this is to the 8th power. And on the bottom, we have 1 minus 3. And so the last thing to remember, and this is kind of key, is to remember that, when you're doing this, this number goes here, right? So we're going to put 6,560 here, and that's going to equal A1 times this thing. Now, one thing that students have a lot of trouble understanding, they understand that they're trying to solve, okay? But when they look at this very large amount of numbers and they think about the order of operations, they sort of don't know what they have at this point because there's so much on the paper. Now, what you actually want to do is you want to simplify this. You just want to type that into your calculator, because if I know what that is, I'm at the multiplication step, right? A1 times this mess. So let's figure out what that mess is, okay? So I'm just going to type in, 1 minus 3 to the 8th power. I'm going to highlight the whole thing, hit division, and type in 1 minus 3, or negative 2, and that's 3,280. So now that I know that, this is 3,280. Once I know what that is, there's actually only one thing to do, which is to divide by that, because again, I'm solving for A1. So all I have to do is divide by 3,280 on both sides. And let's see what we get, right? Because that's the only step we have to worry about once we figure out what this mess is. All right, so back to the calculator one more time. And let's see, we have 6,560 divided by 3,280, and it comes out to 2. So all that work, and we got that A1 is 2. Now, A1 does not have to be an integer. It can be a decimal or a fraction. The only thing it has to be an integer is this in value, which they gave us. So just using that formula like we did earlier, but in this case, using the formula to find different things. In this case, we found the first term using the series formula. And this one, we had to use a series formula, but we're missing information. So it can all be done. Just don't forget about your sequence equation formula, which sometimes comes in as well.